my good old quad smell in the first Canadian area. Because after all, that is one of my rights, to ride wherever I want in this beautiful country I call home. However, did you know not all Canadians have the right to own land wherever they choose? Crazy, right? Although Canada is full of beautiful scenery and remarkable natural landmarks, we may not have the cleanest criminal record. I know you're probably thinking, she's crazy talking about criminal records and stuff. But this beautiful country that we call home might have committed genocide against all Aboriginal peoples in Canada. Don't believe me? Well, follow me.
Maple syrup and bacon. Home, moose and hockey. Oh, I can see you there, just meditating in my old blanket. Huh. Blanket. What a strong symbol for First Nations of people of Canada. As well as blankets, I mean, guns for hunting and simple tools for cooking. So all these trading goods were all introduced to First Nations around the late 1700s. But, I mean, they were coping just fine without them. But as soon as they were introduced, things went downhill. This created a dependency for European trade goods, and this gave Europeans power. Power that was not used correctly, obviously. But as well as Europeans, it gave First Nations power. It revamped the whole leadership system. Instead of chiefs born into it, the strongest were determined who had the better guns, who had the most guns, and the weakest, well, the weakest had none. And now you're probably wondering what this has to do with genocide, but I'll get into that. These new leadership systems were creating wars, and the weakest never lasted. Europeans were collecting all these furs to their advantage. They were wiping out animals by the hundreds, and if not hundreds, thousands, leaving First Nations with little to no food source, which declined their population. This oh so good blanket that we use every day, taken advantage, because these blankets were used as a transportation device for diseases such as smallpox, which wiped out tribe after tribe, decimating community after community. Absolutely horrible. These European traders, of course, also needed families, so they brought theirs along. After moving, these new settlers had no mercy at all. They took away Aboriginal land that was rightfully theirs. They wiped out their tribes. They had no mercy. There's massacre after massacre. There's physical evidence as well as verbal evidence. Physical being actual artifacts and human bones found on these old Aboriginal lands. As well, the verbal evidence being oral traditions and histories passed down generation after generation. And these are no documentation that these events actually happened. One of my favorite quotes from this girl that I can't pronounce her name properly, but her last name is Gal. She was a First Nations that went through the fur trade. But her quote was, "We were born naked and have been taught to hunt and live on the game. You tell us that we must learn to farm, live in one house, and take on your ways. Suppose the people living beyond the Great Sea should come and tell you that you must stop farming and kill your cattle and take your houses and lands. What would you do? Would you not fight them?" If you don't believe that Canada committed genocide after that, well, you better follow me. And you best grab a box of Kleenex, because it's about to get set.
My old school. To most Canadians, elementary school was the good old days. Elementary and high school shaped us into the individuals we are today, gave us the learning experience and the hope for future generations. But to the First Nations people of Canada, their experience was completely different. And not in a good way. It all started in 1884 when the legislation for the residential schools was created. Aboriginal children were forced to attend these schools from the ages 4 to 18, where they would go months or even years without their family. These schools were trained to kill the Indian out of the child. They weren't allowed to speak their own language, practice their own culture, socialize with family members that attend the same school. Food was scarce and only served once a day. Many children died from diseases because the schools were unclean and overcrowded. Many children died of starvation and beatings if they spoke the only language that they knew. Many children died from science experiments they were poked and prodded at. They were treated as guinea pigs. Their teachers were common people like you and me who taught no academics. Their classes were handyman work that created products to be sold. They were treated as slaves. There were grave sites full of unidentified children. So no one truly knows how many. Emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, loss of identity, family, culture, language, and land, all caused by residential schools. I know if I had children, I would never let them attend. But they had no choice. They were forced to have my child not recognize their family, their community, their friends, to have them die and finally discovering years later or never finding out at all. Schools are supposed to be a safe place, a place full of games, learning, trust, and respect. We trust schools. They have created every individual in this country. I hope Canada never forgets the hell they have caused these families, these tribes, this country. Now, the definition of genocide is the intent to destroy in whole or part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. Canada knew, and we did nothing to stop it. Watched these children die. They watched them die and did nothing to stop it. They watched them become spiritless bodies. They watched them physically die. And they caused it too. Up until 1998. 100 years. It took the government 100 years to discover what we're doing is wrong. To discover that we were killing innocent children. Now, I know you don't probably need any further convincing, but if you do, I guess you better follow me some more.
Oh, sorry. I didn't see you there. See, now that apology, that meaningless apology, was probably meant more than the half-assed Stephen Harper apology in 2008. He didn't sound sincere. It was like it was routine. We all know he didn't write it himself. We all know he didn't mean those words. First off, if you've ever seen the apology video, if you've ever seen him apologize, he has no
sympathy in his voice. He didn't sound like he means those words. Second off, in the apology, he straight out recognizes that it was forced assimilation in the residential schools. Forced assimilation, therefore screaming genocide. And then also, a year later, he contradicts himself by saying we had no history of colonialism. Good old Stephen Harper. And the worst part is that was our government. That was our voice. We elected him. We chose him. He spoke for Canada. And what he said just didn't hit home run. So, the apology of 2008 didn't lead to genocide itself, but it sure did not help Canada's guiltiness in the fact that they committed genocide. It just made it worse. Because he blatantly recognized that it was forced assimilation. Forced assimilation, genocide, the intent to kill a certain group, kill off, destroy, which is basically forced assimilation because you're forcing them to conform to your own society and get rid of their own culture. So the apology of 2008. So now I believe you have everything you need to know about Canada being guilty, definitely guilty of committing genocide. I know that's my opinion, but I just wanted to convince you, and I'm pretty sure I did. So yeah, Canada committed genocide. They're overall guilty. Definitely guilty.
No bueno. Loads of diarrhea.
Screaming genocide. Making your day. And there's a freaking car over there that's making lots of noise. Okay, so let's see if we can fix this.
Okay, breathe, Kenzie. You're the guy of everything.
Genocide. It's raining and I hate my life right now.
Because you gotta keep...
Minor bump in the road.
Great quote. Count.
And so that is what I have to say. This is pretty short, but
Was not good, okay? I'm like totally full. Everything blew out of my mind, okay?
because it's Stephen Harper. Conservative, hello up.
You see Puffin?
Yeah, she's on the trailer.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Well, it just gets so shaded.
And that is why we have bloopers.